Today's alkaline technologies, hydrogen
Hmm.
production, they're 100 years old. They've been used in the chloroalkali process. We use it in the refining
Hmm.
industry. We use it for ammonia production. So there's lots of current uses for hydrogen. I think where it's new in the low carbon hydrogen production is taking those electrolyzers, scaling them up to much larger scales.
Yeah.
Right now in Delta, Utah, there's a 220 megawatt hydrogen system being installed.
The research coming from EPRI is relied on by hundreds, maybe thousands of professionals and most of the major utilities in the United States around the world because of senior technical leaders like Brittany Westlake, who dedicate their career to digging into the facts and building the charts that support the energy transition around all types of clean tech technologies. Here at UNC Clean Tech Summit 2024, I have the opportunity and the honor to meet with former UNC graduates who have moved on into the clean tech, clean energy revolution. My name is Nico Johnson. I'm the host here for the Suncast Media Zone, brought to you by FTC Solar, Powen, and Imperial Star. Today, Brittany Westlake and I are going to talk about the work that she's doing on hydrogen electrolysis and all of the other work that led up to it. And we'll start, Brittany, with a question that I think was quite funny that you posed to me earlier, which is what do chemistry students do when they grow up? Something along those lines. How you were an undergraduate and then a graduate student here at UNC, if I remember correctly.
My undergrad was at the University of Georgia.
Okay,
My graduate work was here at Chapel Hill.
right on. Well, you redeemed yourself.
As to the larger question of what do chemists do when they grow up, I'm still working on that.
Uh huh.
I'm not sure what I want to be when I fully grow up, but along the way, I've had the opportunity to work on energy policy in DC and then now at EPRI, um, both battery storage technology and then looking at hydrogen production for our future energy grid needs.
I can certainly see how, as a chemistry undergrad, going into the the side of the business would be fascinating. Is there any particular element of the chemistry of batteries that fascinated you early on, or still has captured your research attention at least?
So yeah, as a chemist, the battery chemistry part is the obvious focus.
Hmm.
But between graduate school and coming to EPRI, I actually detoured and did policy fellowships. So for me, the storage part was the chemistry, the technology, what the hardware could do on the grid,
Okay.
but also the why. Where
Mm.
does it make sense? Where do we need it on the grid to help balance
So
our
more of the
energy
tech.
demands? And I'm not an economist, but I know it has to make economic sense and
Mm.
be sustainable for the companies developing it and for where we deploy it. So some of it, I guess I got my foot in the door with the chemistry,
Yeah.
but really it's that broader understanding and how it all fits together that I think is some of the lore.
Is there something about that early time in the battery storage side of the business, that underlying why of the energy transition and where batteries fit, that you'd want to share with our audience?
I don't think batteries unlocked it.
Mm.
I think for me, it was even before that, I was a policy fellow in the Office of Electricity, looking at the grid as a system and thinking about how do we make sure that it's reliable,
Yeah.
it's affordable, it's working, we don't have transmission constraints. And so batteries are a really interesting technology tool to keep the grid running. Produce the power, you can transmit it on transmission lines when they're not overloaded, park
Right.
it in the battery, and have it
Mm.
to utilize when you need it.
Yeah.
Or store it close to the distribution that you're going to use it on and use it to balance that on the grid.
Yeah. I heard someone refer to it yesterday as a shock absorber for the grid.
Yeah, it's maybe a cruder way is the elastic in your pants, right? A little bit of
That's
flexibility
great.
makes everything fit together better.
Oh my gosh, that's really good. How did you find yourself transitioning from battery storage into hydrogen research?
I was doing battery research, but I was in our energy storage and distributed generation team.
Hmm.
So I was working on batteries, but then scouting all the other storage
Hmm.
technologies that we're developing. And if anyone's been tracking storage technologies, there's been a number of new ones in that scouting and looking at kind of all the options. Hydrogen, especially if you look at nuclear and flexible operation with nuclear or flexible outside things,
Hmm.
it's hard to meet 1,000 megawatts coming down 30% for 6 hours.
Yeah.
I crunch those numbers, it starts to be a lot. So thinking about hydrogen, storing some of that electricity in hydrogen bonds. You're using that electricity to store the energy in that hydrogen bond.
Right.
So we think about hydrogen.
As a
It's not a
hydrogen
fuel.
molecule, right?
It's
Yeah.
a secondary that you can use in forklifts
Sure.
in warehouses
Yeah.
for potentially power generation in the future to replace some of the natural gas we use for peaking power. Even just to decarbonize the way we make ammonia today with kind of a carbon intensive steam methane reformation process.
Yeah.
A lot of opportunities to think about how do we shift kind of our thinking and maybe use hydrogen as a role for decarbonization for some longer duration energy storage on the grid. The challenge with hydrogen can be that it's got the potential to do so many things.
Yeah.
So you've got to
It's a
focus
Swiss
on,
Army knife.
I mean, a Swiss Army knife can do a lot of things. It can't do them all at once.
It can't, and it
right?
can't do them all well.
That is also a fair analogy. Yes.
I rarely use my Swiss Army knife as a screwdriver, and almost never as a can opener.
You like things with flexibility on the grid. It's going to be very important as we move forward. But I think to your point, there's also a lot of value of having your specified knife, your good wine opener.
That's right.
I don't remember what else Swiss Army knives do, but having
Sure.
those specialized tools that can do what you need across the grid or in your kitchen.
Yeah, well, I kind of think of if we further the Swiss Army knife analogy, not that we need to stay there, but almost everyone has this thing that flips out that has a serrated knife edge, and on the side of it is a file that's maybe the length of your finger, right? Like a file that you would use to file something down. I can't imagine cutting a tree down with the saw, and I can't imagine actually sharpening anything with the file. And for
Is
me,
the file not for your fingernails when you break a nail?
I'm sure that others have higher and better use for it. And I kind of look at light duty vehicles as maybe that saw or the file. Like probably want a different special purpose tool, that type of fuel application. But actually that leads to a question that I have for you, because I think that given the work that you all do at EPRI,
Well, if I can pause you for a minute.
Go for it. You want to?
I'm going to talk to the audience. Do you see what he's trying to do? He's trying to get me into the light duty vehicle battery versus hydrogen argument.
Yes. Well, no, I'm actually trying to presume for the audience that there's a right and a wrong.
There's an it depends.
Okay.
So, and going back to when I was scouting, I was looking at battery technologies. They have great capabilities. There's a lithium battery in your phone.
Yes.
It works great. This watch has a battery. My other watch is I just wear it around and it makes it work.
Yeah.
There's, I think, the right technology for the right application. And as someone who is scouting across all the battery technologies and the fuel cell and the hydrogen potential, I have no patience for when those two groups want to fight. Because I think they both have strengths.
Yeah.
They should go do what makes sense for them to do.
Well, then in that regard, what is hype and what is not hype around the real hydrogen economy that we should expect to see over the coming decade?
I think some of the hype is that hydrogen's going to be the solution for everything, the answer for all of it.
Right.
It's going to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
So like the Swiss
it
Army
fits well
knife.
with the existing infrastructure, right? For moving molecules.
Yeah, we have infrastructure to move molecules. We have 43 days of natural gas storage here in the US. We use it in our chemical
I
processing.
didn't know that number. That's fascinating. 43 days.
So going back to your question of hype
Sure.
versus, it's part of the solution. It's not the solution. Do we stop all of the research? No. But do we think about where it can play a role, where it can help us decarbonize our chemical industry,
Yeah.
create sustainable aviation fuels, thinking about some regional opportunities of Europe or Asian markets where they don't have some of these renewable resources that we have here in the US? Can they look to other regions, produce hydrogen, transform it into ammonia, and use that to import low carbon energy into their regions cost effectively?
Right.
I think that's the challenge on us of how do we do it economically?
Yeah.
How do we determine where those potentially make the most sense versus alternative technologies that might be better suited?
When we first began to chat, even someone who's been in the industry for a long time, I did an entire green hydrogen series. And it's easy for even those of us who are professionals that don't think about hydrogen every day to assume that hydrogen generally as a topic is a clean tech subject, right? It's a clean energy and that there's not an unclean version of hydrogen. But the reality is, and you refer to it both in title and application as carbon intensive or low carbon hydrogen. What is low carbon hydrogen? And maybe for the uninitiated in the audience, help distinguish between, you mentioned a minute ago, the way that we have historically used and leveraged hydrogen in our economic activity and how a transition to low carbon hydrogen makes sense.
Today's alkaline technologies, hydrogen
Hmm.
production, they're 100 years old.
Yeah.
They've been used in the chloroalkali process. We use it for in the refining
Hmm.
industry. We use it for ammonia production.
Hmm. For
Um,
steel and many other applications.
yeah, so there's lots of current uses for hydrogen. It's new, but I think where it's new in the low carbon hydrogen production is taking those electrolyzers, scaling them up to much larger scales.
Yeah.
Right now in Delta, Utah, there's a 220 megawatt hydrogen system being installed. And also thinking about how we operate them. Traditionally, capital intensive, they've been operated in baseload.
Right.
But as we look to a future where these help us absorb intermittent renewables and store that energy or balance the grid, we can think about them kind of as a controllable load potentially
Sure.
and think about operating them flexibly.
Well, and they've been used as a baseload because, from an economic perspective, if the utilization rate drops below, say, 95% for hydrogen, it's not a good economic alternative,
Well,
right?
if you're building a chloroalkali process, yeah, you want to get the maximum out of your industrial or
Right. The
kind of.
electrolyzer.
There's some analysis out of NREL where 30% is maybe that operational
Oh,
sweet
wow.
spot of, when the capex and the low power
That's
opportunity.
way lower than I've heard before.
Check out Mark Ruth's research.
I'm gonna have to. I'll have Mark Ruth on.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. What are you seeing through the research around low carbon hydrogen that is really becoming more prevalent, in particular, in the dialogue back to your policy days on Capitol Hill, or how the narrative around incentivizing or building infrastructure around the hydrogen economy will take root? Like, there have to be some what called lead horses in the race, right? In terms of the way that we get legislators and economic innovation to center around the technologies that hold the most promise for low carbon hydrogen in the near term.
That's something in the policy world we don't have to speculate about anymore. We saw hydrogen take off in Europe.
Yeah.
Circa 2019, 2020, they sent out their price signals
Hmm.
that they were willing to pay for green ammonia,
Yep.
green hydrogen.
And transport over long distances to do so.
And they set up kind of project development in the Middle East,
In
in
Australia,
South America. I think Australia is targeting the Asian
the Asian
markets,
market, yeah.
but I'm sure looking at the opportunity for Europe. So we saw that policy be very effective and kickstart some of the low carbon hydrogen. And then here in the US, we said, well, wait a minute, we
Yeah.
can do this too.
Hmm.
And we saw really big legislation to support hydrogen hubs, to support research and development in the space. DOE just put out $750 million covering end of life for these systems
Yeah.
to secure the supply chain and recovery of the materials,
Yeah.
manufacturing, electrolysis, and fuel cell research that'll help support this. Sunita Sachapal, who is the lead of the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Office, I think she's been in that role for 20 years. And if you want to move an industry forward, track her career, take notes, and track what she's been doing is kind of moving this forward and inspiring a community behind where it has potential.
So I want to come back around to the more discrete applications where we see not promise, but practical application today. Because a lot of folks would say, well, don't we have electric vehicles? Why do we need hydrogen? And I'm thinking more from a consumer perspective, like not the scientists or the large scale project developers or the folks that are in hard to decarbonize, like heavy industries. For the rest of us that are trying to wrap their heads around hydrogen, we see, Arnold Schwarzenegger driving his hydrogen Hummer, and then we see California, taking out hydrogen fuel stations. Where does hydrogen fit in the more downstream economy? You mentioned Plug Power as an example. Are there others?
So forklifts, I guess I have probably too many packages that appear on my
sure you do.
doorstep. Being a researcher at EPRI, I think about the energy involved in those, but I think a lot of people, you log into your phone,
Yeah.
the data center that's doing those calculations, you might not be aware of the power, the backup power that's used to operate those data centers.
Yeah.
Today, there's a 2-minute lead acid battery that picks up if there's a grid disturbance, and then there's backup power that's fossil intensive after that.
Right, because it's a UPS.
Yeah, as we go to the future, some of those UPS technologies might be done with hydrogen or fuel cells.
Oh, fascinating.
As a consumer, you won't see that. It'll happen behind the scenes.
Ooh.
Whether there's a battery or a fuel cell delivery truck that brings it down the streets of your neighborhood.
What about the robots inside of Amazon warehouse?
I don't know. They can do what they want.
They're not as power intensive.
Um, no, I mean, fuel cells potentially, they're robots. They
They don't
can
have
go
the same
charge
load. Yeah.
themselves versus like a forklift where a human operator has to charge it. You can't
But
use it.
I'm glad you actually brought it. So there's this activity behind the veil that most consumers aren't aware of that is truly driving our day-to-day lives. And those applications are relying on traditional technology
Mhm.
like lead acid batteries. That is the disruption more so than even, petrochemicals in terms of how hydrogen can displace uh, old technology. Is that what I'm hearing?
For those forklift applications, lead acid. For diesel backup generators, maybe potentially diesel.
Sure.
Going back to my Amazon delivery truck,
Hmm.
if those are delivered on your street with a battery or a fuel cell vehicle,
Yeah.
this would be zero emission. We'd want to do it cost effectively, but also potentially the health impacts
Oh yeah.
of having zero emission vehicles running around in our cities and our neighborhoods. There's the economic energy concerns, and then there's also maybe the broader health,
Mm.
community, sustainability concerns that can be harder to
Mm.
quantify, especially as we're not used to pricing some of those externalities that go in our energy processes.
So I'm going to turn the phrase on concerns and focus on one of the core constituents for EPRI, which are utilities. What are the concerns of the utilities in terms of integrating hydrogen into either the grid or the local economy? Is there infrastructure concerns, or what else from a policy perspective, or else otherwise that I would not be aware of enough to ask you a more specific question?
EPRI, we are a 50-year-old nonprofit,
Sure.
and we were started after blackouts here in the US on the East Coast,
Hmm.
realizing that individual utilities needed a way to collaboratively do research.
Right.
But we're a nonprofit with a public benefit mission.
Yeah.
So in our research, we push for where we providing public value as well as member value.
Wow.
And we do have utility members. We also have non-utility, but really core is ours is, especially in the hydrogen spaces, how are we thinking about kind of the future energy? How do we make sure that it's sustainable,
Yeah.
not just for a utility or a electric or a gas utility, but kind of broadly across the energy space? We're not just doing research for the utilities,
Yeah.
although it is very rewarding to see it's a good opportunity to work with utilities to see how our research is applied.
Right. Exactly.
That's one thing that I really like is seeing how it can be impactful, where it makes sense, where it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. And so a lot of utilities have net zero targets, which is EPRI found or started a low carbon resources initiative. And it was really to look at what are those technologies? What don't we know that we need to better understand,
Yeah.
think about how we deploy to support the energy sector in the future as we decarbonize. And so, my analogy of Amazon, the data centers, getting the package from the warehouse, delivering it to your house. Some of those are going to be near-term technologies, and some of the work on hydrogen is going to be a longer term.
Yeah.
Where does it make sense in the future? Going to the analogy we heard this morning on puzzles, you can see the picture of the puzzle on the box. We're kind of doing some of the research of we can all see that decarbonization future
Yeah.
where there's a myriad of technologies and solutions and opportunities. And at EPRI, we try to do the research and help identify the steps along the pathway that get us to that low carbon future.
Well, to connect it back to the UNC Clean Tech Summit, there are hundreds of students, not just here at UNC, but then thousands of students across America who truly want to have a career in clean tech or clean energy. What advice would you have, or do you often give as you're approached by folks that are thinking, how do I get my start? Are there specific vectors that you've identified that are more helpful than others for folks that want to get a career in clean energy and kicked off?
I think we often make students think that there's the skill set they need or the specific things they want to know. I think the energy space is huge.
Yeah.
I'm a chemist. I like understanding how the technologies work and where they have their potential. But really, it's going to take all the skill sets.
Yeah.
We need the communications professionals. We need lawyers. There's going to be a lot of contracts in new clean energy projects.
Right.
We need the construction workers, the electricians.
Yeah.
We need the people doing the modeling so we can understand trade-offs of different ones. We need people, putting these systems in place and doing it. So my advice to folks starting their career, interested in this space, is think about which part of it, to steal Marie Kondo's, like, sparks joy.
Yeah.
Which part do you like doing every day?
Yeah.
And look for opportunities where you can apply your skills and your interests to really drive this forward. Because ultimately, we're going to take everyone.
Yeah.
I'm only good at the chemistry part, but we're going to need all the skill sets. So if you guys could come fill in where I'm not as strong, that would be great.
Brittany Westlake is the senior technical leader on hydrogen electrolysis at EPRI, and it is truly inspiring to see the work that is coming out of EPRI, that you all are helping lead the initiatives that are giving insight to the leaders in utilities, communities, and development of this technology around the world. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.